And welcome everybody. I'm excited to see this is the first time at this new time, and I'm glad to see we have numbers here. So that's exciting. We've been the last several of these that I've done. We've been talking about conflict in relationships and different aspects of relationships where conflict forms around, and some ways to kind of jumpstart the gridlock. So today, just in time for Christmas, we're going to talk about relatives and extended family. Um, because I was just talking to a family member of mine, and they were asking how my clients tend to do around the holidays, and I said said they all end up in the same place, which is miserable and triggered because of all the time they spend around their family. Some of them know that it's coming, and they prepare for it, and others feel like Christmas and Thanksgiving will solve every problem we have in the family, and I don't need to worry about it. For relationships, this is particularly I think important, not just this time of year, but any time of year, because the family that you come from is the culture you were raised in. Even if you marry or are in a long-term relationship with someone who grew up next door to you, they came from a different culture. And it's really, really important to understand what that person's family culture means to them, before we move into any kind of compromise or negotiating or what are we going to do about this. That's where I think a lot of times people can feel attacked, is when the way that they do things because it's the way their family did things, or they believe because it's the way their family believed, when that comes under attack, or when we're told that's got to change because it's not going to work for me. So as we talk about these different aspects, the thing I want you to put in the back of your mind is first seek to deepen your understanding before moving for a compromise or a negotiation on this. And I would say this has to do, or this is relevant with just about any cross-cultural issue in any relationship. So for example, my sister is an actuary, so she works with a bunch of people who relate to numbers better than they relate to people, and she's got the most fascinating stories about her coworkers because of this. She has a coworker who is from a different continent, and she's often very, very frustrated with how he talks about his wife and his children. And she'll say, he's so wrong, he's so wrong. And one of the things that she's challenged herself to do is to learn more about his culture, whether she agrees with it or not, but to learn more about his culture so that she's not always walking around triggered by this guy. So when it comes to your relationship, your relatives and extended family, the first sign of trouble, I would say, is when you start questioning which family your partner is in. Are you in our family? Are you in our unit? Or are you in the family that you came from? Lots and lots of research has indicated for a romantic relationship to survive, it's crucial to the success of that relationship that the partners put each other first, even above the families that they came from. And this is cross-cultural. And that the way that that looks to put your partner first, of course, is different for every coupleship. But that feeling of I'm your primary concern and everything comes next is crucial to the success of a relationship. So when you start questioning which family are you part of, for your partner, that's a sign that there's some trouble. A lot of times people can struggle in their relationships because not only may they struggle with feelings of acceptance or feelings of being accepted, but if your family by extension is not accepted by your partner, or you struggle to know how your partner feels about your family, or whether or not that's consistent, that can be a big source of contention in a relationship. Extended families, relatives, all those sorts of things, they can introduce a lot of tension into a relationship. There's a sketch comedy show my kids really like to watch, and I was watching the Christmas episode with them last night, and I would say probably 75% of the sketches centered around tension among family members around the holidays. Like it's such a big part of how we experience our loved ones, our partners, our coworkers, world is through the family they came in, and whether that family is accepted or rejected, or whether or not our feelings about that family mirror our partner's feelings about that family, it can cause some problems. So like I said in the beginning, the goal here is to deepen your understanding about your loved one, your partners, whoever it is. Deepen your understanding about the culture and the family and the relationships they came from, before you move into compromise. This shows up in some, I think, really specific ways. I do a lot of work with enmeshed men, mother enmeshed men. And this is a really interesting thing to watch across cultures, because in some cultures, the expectation is when a couple gets married, they will live in mom and dad's house, and like mom and dad are still in charge. And that's not necessarily a problem. That doesn't necessarily cause psychological strife. There are some families where, technically speaking, enmeshment is the norm. Enmeshment just means we're really, really close. There's not a whole lot of boundaries and a whole lot of separation between family members. We see this in America historically in immigrant communities. Those families tend to be more enmeshed than more like second and third generation American families. And part of that is because you're a unit, a family that has come from a culture that's different than this one, and you cling to each other. You stay close to each other for a sense of normalcy and a sense of belonging. And so that closeness in a family isn't necessarily a problem. Where we run into a problem is where the identities in the family are merged. So if what I see with enmeshed men that can cause a lot of conflict in a relationship, it can be if this enmeshed man's partner or spouse has a problem with the enmeshed man, he also has a problem with his mother and the whole family. And so like sides are chosen very quickly. That would be what we call a merged identity. So it's not just that there's not a lot of boundaries. It's that my sense of me depends on your sense of me and your sense of you. We don't have a differentiation in the identities. That is not a phenomenon that is culturally specific. There are some cultures that are more family centric and more individual centric, but that merged identity is not a cultural thing. That tends to be more of what I would say is like a psychological problem. And so it's important, if there's closeness in your partner's family that bothers you and has you wondering which family are you part of, it's really important that you can dig in with them and you can dive in with them and you can find out what that closeness means to your partner, why that closeness exists the way that it does. I have family. I have a family member I'm spending some time with recently, and she and her brother they have a very, very close relationship. And they consider each other one another's best friends. And both of them are married now, and they had to vet the person that their sibling was marrying. If you look at that on the surface, it's like, well, that's kind of weird. If you understand the background they came from, dad died when both of the kids were young, and mom had a mental breakdown as a result. And so they essentially raised each other. They've relied on each other for survival their whole lives. And so this closeness, it makes some sense. And that's something that both of their spouses talk about. They say, I know when I have a relationship with my spouse, I also have a relationship with their sibling. And it needs to be that way. I have to maintain a good relationship with their sibling in order to maintain a good relationship with them, because there's a background that makes sense in, and that explains it. And that's one of those examples of where understanding where your partner is coming from makes those issues that we have to negotiate and compromise around easier to navigate, because we may get a sense of what is non-negotiable for our partner, what's important, what's a part of their identity, what's hard for them to let go. We may also get a sense of where we're flexible. When we understand where somebody's coming from, it's a lot easier for us to say, oh, I can accommodate that. I understand what that's about. It's not about me, that's about you. Some things to think about as we are in the middle of this in North America, this holiday season where family tends to be a big thing. Start thinking about the way that your family may impact how you show up in relationships, how your partner's family may impact how they show up in relationships, and most importantly, the conversations that you need to have with your loved ones in order to understand where they're coming from, so that those relationships can continue to be strong and supportive.
Thank you, Jon. That was great. The holidays bring out the best of us and the worst of us. and family dynamics, same story, the best and the worst, I think. everybody, feel free to ask questions using the Q&A feature or the chat feature. John, I'll start us off with, I live 2,000 miles away from my family for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
I love them, but I love them from afar. And I don't go home for the holidays, and we've all accepted that. But my sister lives 5 minutes from my parents, and she has an ex-husband whose family is in town, and she has another ex-husband whose family is in town, and she has 3 kids. And even when the 3 kids are all with their first husband, even when they were married, the fight was who gets who when for the holidays. Because the in-laws wanted them, my parents wanted them, and my sister and her husband wanted to have their own life with their kids, and that fight is still raging, almost 30 years later. The kids are grown, but it's still who gets who when. And how do you coach people on how to deal with that and how to compromise and keep their own family intact while honoring the family they were each raised in?
There's a couple principles with couples and people in that situation that I ask them to follow. Is first, to make no definitive statements. It always has to be this way. It can never be another way. It actually makes me think of an issue that my wife and I navigated early on in her relationship. Her family has a lot of traditions around holidays, especially Christmas. My family didn't have a lot of set traditions, but we had good intentions to spend quality time together. And so we had to have a lot of those conversations that we had to start with, like, okay, I'm open to having this look different than I expected. We had to really work on holding that space so we could really hear each other. And then we had to have a lot of conversations around, what does this mean to you? So like Christmas Eve for my wife's family is like bigger than Christmas Day. And I had to spend a lot of time, not just talking to her and understanding why it was important to her, but like getting to know her family and what it meant to them. And that didn't necessarily flip the switch in my mind. It was like, okay, well, it's not an issue for me anymore. But with that deeper understanding, and that not being wed to here's the outcome I've got to have, we tend to have some flexibility and we tend to have some compromise. One of the things that we ended up looking at was where our families naturally had the meaningful interactions. And with my family, it's actually not on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. Those are kind of this like rote thing, but there's a lot of family parties with extended family before and after Christmas that are really important. And so when we understood that about each other and where we came from, it kind of made the decision a little clearer. It helped it be a little more flexible, and we also had to orient to our own relationship. So, in the beginning for us, there was a lot of pressure from both sides of the family not to disappoint, and we essentially had to say to each other, are we going to try to make them happy, or are we going to try to make us happy? And we had to decide that our orientation, we're going to do what works for our family. And so we had to support each other in dealing with some guilt feelings and saying no. We had to support each other in, there were some years where, I can think of years where both of us had a hard line. It's like, well, this just has to happen for me. And we had to be willing to support each other on that, with the hope that when the next year rolled around, that there would be some reciprocation or some flexibility. But that would be the main thing I would say for couples in that situation is what I pointed to in the research before. It's crucial to the success of a coupleship that the feeling is we put each other first. If that's in question or that can't happen, there's almost not a way around it. That couple is going to be in trouble, and they're going to have perpetual problems if they can't figure out that we belong to each other first, and then we belong to our families second. And I found with the couples that I've worked with, when they have that orientation to one another, it's almost like this armor or this self-contained unit that they can go into any family interaction and they can do okay. because they know where their priority lies with each other. And they know if we've made the decision to, do this thing with your family at the expense of doing it with my family, we're going to be okay because we chose this. And if there's something to make up for later on, or there's, an unmet need in one of us because we did this and not that, we will figure that out. We'll help each other with that.
Yeah, I like what you said earlier about, one of the signs of trouble is, when you're wondering which relationship is my partner in.
Yeah.
And I think I think it sounds like the key for you has been putting your relationship first. I don't think my sister was ever able to do that.
It's and for folks who like, I am a proud mother and meshed man in recovery, and that was hard for me. Like, that was a legitimate struggle. I look back now and I say that shouldn't have been the struggle it was, but it was, and it was very real for me. But that I think a lot of people come to their long-term relationships still pretty dependent on the families that they came from for emotional support, because that's the former big relationship that we depended on for a lot of things. And it's something to be figured out. Transition from a individual who's part of a bigger family to an individual who's part of a family, like a coupleship. It's a transition. It's not a decision I make in one moment. There's a whole lot to figure out. There's a whole lot to negotiate.
Everybody, if you joined us late, our topic today is conflict in relationships, which is part of a series that Jon's conducting. And this one deals, just in time for the holidays, with extended family. So ask questions using the Q&A feature or the chat feature. I got one here. This is from, I believe, a male. We live under the same roof, as my wife's mother, with different spaces. My wife's mother and her sister comes to visit on holidays, trigger my wife, and elevate the tension between me and her. We are 6 months into disclosure about his sex addiction, so we are already heightened in our potential conflict. Understandable. I struggle to be patient and more tenacious and staying calm when the house is full of relatives. My wife and I are struggling every day with my addiction and recovery. How do I strengthen my resolve to stay calm, present, and forgiving?
So my first thought there is I start out the holidays really bright-eyed and hopeful, and I usually end up a Scrooge. And part of that is because there are too many people in my house too much of the time. And that's like when it's my house. I would imagine being in your mother-in-law's house and the people coming and going. I think that's inherently stressful, even if they're enjoyable people. So the first thing that I would recommend is making sure that as part of your individual self-care plan, you carve out some individual time, and you carve out what I would call like emergency escape routes. If, for example, there's a big family party and you can feel the tension rising, can you have as part of your plan the ability to go take a walk, to have some quiet time, and not just withdraw angrily or sulkily? I think that's one of the things that causes a lot of tension in coupleships, is when I'm overstimulated by the group, or I'm over anxious because of the group that I'm in. And instead of responsibly checking out and taking care of myself, I just withdraw into myself. And then you feel abandoned, you feel like I don't like your family, and it becomes all about the wrong issue. So if part of the plan needs to be you and your spouse carve out some time for the two of you, whether that's like to go to meetings, make sure you go on a date. It might be a good time of year to spend a night away if you can swing that, if you can make that happen. Make sure that you keep up with your recovery work, your therapy appointments. I really like the idea of bookending, which is the concept of support before and after some kind of difficult interaction. When I was, really in the middle of my addiction recovery, I had my sponsor on speed dial, and we had we had it set every family interaction I was going to have. I would call him before and I would call him immediately after, whether I needed it or not. Just as some of that touchstone and ability to process some of the feelings. So to me, this all becomes about space and making sure that you carve out enough space for you before, during, and after that you can choose. You said you want to be calm, present, and forgiving. Those are all choices. And they're choices that we have an easier time making when we don't feel stretched too thin and stressed out and put upon. So I would definitely look into carving out that space and making sure that you and your wife have enough of a informed plan between the two of you, so that if one of you needs to take a break, you know what that's about, you know when you'll be returning, and it doesn't have to turn into an issue between you and your spouse.
Yeah, everything Jon said, 100%. I do check-ins for myself at Hungry, Angry, Lonely, Tired. I also use the SPIES, how am I doing sexually, physically, with intimacy, emotional, and spiritually. I do daily check-ins with myself during difficult times. And I don't have a partner, but if I did, I would want to do a daily relationship check-in with my partner, where we set aside 15 minutes at 9 p.m. every day, no matter what. And we go into a room that's quiet and the two of us, and maybe we light a candle, and you tell me about your day, I'll tell you about my day, what was good, what was bad, what am I struggling with, you do the same, and we can support each other. And that's a way to do it. I've got a blog on sex and relationship healing right now about how to survive the holidays. And I don't know if you're also in AA. I am. There's a passage in the AA Big Book about acceptance is the answer to all of my problems. And basically that's, at the holidays, that means, if I was in Indiana, I would have to accept that my mother will follow my poor sister around the kitchen and tell her how to make the green bean casserole. And that my nephew will put half a stick of butter on every dinner roll. And it's really unhealthy. It's like, I like butter, but come on. And I just have to accept people as they are. And at the holidays, I kind of consider it my gift to them to accept their quirkiness and let them be who they are.
I love that.
It's kind of a selfish way. It's like, this is my gift to you, but it's what I have to do in my head to, get to a place where I'm calm and present and forgiving. And it's hard. Yeah.
I really love that reframe, that the gift I can give to you is that you get to be who you are for this, and I don't have to resist that in any way.
Yeah. We've got something in the chat feature. Jon, please provide that resource.
Sure.
Here.
So there's actually a local organization that is it okay if I read this question?
Yeah, go ahead. Don't use the name.
Yeah. So this person said, discovery for me was the 2.5 years ago when I got a call from jail, and my husband of 25 years had tried to buy a 13-year-old minor. It turned out to be a sex sting. He got a 10-year prison sentence, and we're divorcing. My question is, do you have any support or websites for spouses facing this reality and the forever label of having been married to a sex offender without even knowing? I feel guilt by association, even though I had no idea what he'd been up to the entire marriage. I'm so sorry that is that happened, and there totally is that guilt by association stigma. There's a local therapist near me. Her name is Candace Christiansen, and she actually works where the intersection of sex addiction and sex offending meets. And she does support for spouses of people who have offended. So you can find out, I think the website, let me check it really quick. I think it's Namaste Advice.
It is.
Is that it, Scott?
Yeah, advice.com. I probably spelled namaste. I'm typing in the feature. I'm probably spelling Candace's name wrong.
That would be that's the resource I'm most familiar with, and it speaks to exactly what you're talking about. Is even leaving the marriage, there are some issues and there's some baggage and there's some heartache and some hurt for you because of your husband's choices. And um, the way that our society works is this is not a private thing for your family. He's on the registry, and people who have known you have known him, and can connect the dots. So Canvas would be a great place to start as a resource, and I hope you can start to find. I hope you can start to find some of the resources you're looking for and some of the healing you're looking for there.
Candace is great. She's been on our site. She's done a couple blogs. She's even filled in on some discussion groups and webinars and things. She really knows her stuff. She's a lovely human being. Great idea, Jon. Thank you. Let's take this a step further, though. This individual now has to go through the holidays with this huge baggage. How does one deal with baggage in your life at the holidays? Is it a great time to seek support? Do you come clean? What do you do? Do you keep secrets? How do you handle this?
It's so hard, and the place I keep coming back to is there's never a good time to start dealing with it. I certainly would not be. I would not encourage somebody to hold back from getting help or coming clean just so they don't ruin Christmas or ruin New Year's or whatever. Because what you would tend to do if you make that resolve is you would tend not to act at the end. And so for me going forward, like once the cat's out of the bag, once the holiday is contaminated, so to speak, I give the same advice to individuals that I give to couples, and I'll say, like, to couples after an affair, I'll say marriage 1 is over, and if you want to stay married, you'd be working on marriage 2 together. We'd really be building this from the ground up. And it's the same thing with holidays and traditions and what the holiday means. There may be some aspects of the holidays that you used to love that now are forever changed, that they're a trigger now instead of something that you enjoy. So I would start with you deciding what you want the holiday to be about, how you want to celebrate it, what you need. I've worked with folks in the past who have reworked Mother's Day and Father's Day because their relationship with their mother and father was not a great one, and it wasn't anything that they wanted to celebrate, or that frankly was even worthy of celebrating. And so one person I'm thinking of on Mother's Day, she decided to celebrate the people that she was a mother to, and that's what she wanted the holiday to be about. And so she changed up the traditions, and she got really intentional, and she let people know, this is my focus on this holiday, and this is what I'm going to do with this. I think that is it can be a big relief to kind of free yourself from others' expectations or from traditions or whatever, and let whatever time of year it is, whatever's coming up, be about what you're needing. To me, that's the very basis of good self-care. Is I check in here first, and I make sure that I have enough of what I need, because whatever I have to do next is going to require some compassion, some love, some energy from me, and I need to make sure that I'm full enough of that. So around the holidays, getting started in recovery, there's never a good time to come clean, and there's never a bad time to get started in healing. And so traditions can be reworked, wounds can be healed, associations can be uncoupled with time. So I would say, like, what you need to do now is what you need to do, and be let yourself be committed to building the life that you need now, rather than preserving the life you think you should have had, and everybody wants you to maintain, so you don't let them down.
Yeah, and let's just acknowledge the trauma of having a family member who's going through something, whether it's of his or her own doing or not. I mean, you could have a family member who's got cancer, and that's traumatic for the family member, but it's also highly traumatic for you as an individual and for the family as a unit, or somebody's an active alcoholic, crazy Uncle Joe is coming over for Christmas Eve. Everybody brace yourself. There's trauma involved in that. Whatever's going on, it can be really traumatic. And I think the holidays heighten that.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is, I think, the perfect time of year to bring together like everybody's major issues, family, money. If you live in the northern hemisphere, like seasonal affective stuff, like it really is a time of year to bring together all of the most horrible things that we experience. And like you said, Scott, some of the most wonderful aspects of humankind. And it's okay that it's a mixed bag. It's okay that you don't love it and you're not into it, if that's how you feel. Because again, that basis of self-care is getting what you need so that your own cup, your own account is full, and you can give what you want to give when you want to give it.
Yeah, then one of the nice things I've learned about in recovery is that I always have choices, and I can choose to do the holidays in the healthiest, most enjoyable, least stressful way for me, which is not necessarily what my mother, I have an enmeshed mother as well, would like. So we've got a question here. I was abandoned by my dysfunctional family when I was 15. There is no contact whatsoever. My partner abandoned me recently. I find it very difficult to connect to people overall. I am safe when I'm alone. So I live a very solitary life, and I am wondering what the hell I'm doing in this world. Does that make sense? And then there's an addition. It's so difficult to find healthy, normal people. Thoughts, Jon?
That makes a lot of sense. It reminds me of someone that I worked with in the past who he was abandoned emotionally by his mom. In fact, he found out later on that a couple of his aunts had reported his mom to CPS several times in hopes that they could get the kids taken out of the home and get them in a safer situation. And it never happened. And he has an attachment story where it makes a whole lot of sense that he's not too enthusiastic about relationships, and he doesn't have a lot of confidence that they're going to work out. But one of the things he would keep bringing up to me is like, what's this whole like wired for connection thing? It doesn't make sense to me. And what wired for connection means is biologically as human beings, the way our wiring works is we do the best in safe, connected relationships. We're herd animals, so to speak. That's when we perform optimally, is when we're in a safe herd. So I can really hear in this like that conflict between everything in life has taught me that relationships aren't safe and I'm safest alone. At the same time, what am I doing in this world if I just live this solitary existence? And with this follow-up, it's so difficult to find healthy, normal people. I say amen to that. I found, especially for me, that the people that I felt a spark of connection with were usually people who felt familiar to me, not so much healthy to me. And familiar to me was also some of that abandonment, and emotional unavailability, and manipulation and things like that. I think there can be a lot of value in a recovery process having a period of time where you're intentionally in solitude. I do a lot of this kind of work with the enmeshed men that I work with. There's a lot of value in being able to just hear your own thoughts, feel your own feelings, and have your own experience without a relationship kind of layering on that or confusing that. This reminds me of something that, what's his name? The guy that, Joseph Campbell, he back in the 50s and 60s wrote a lot about mythology and kind of like the common human story that we tell over and over again about the hero that defeats the dragon and emerges victorious. And a quote I really love of his is, if you find yourself in a free fall, turn it into a dive, essentially. So some of this like solitary life that you're living, you may have started that coming from this like, nobody is safe and I'm better off alone. I wonder what that would look like for you to turn that into something intentional. I'm choosing to be alone because my pattern so far in relationships is I pick ones that are hurtful, and I don't want to do that again. So are there interests, is there self-development that you really want to dive into, that strong sense of self, so that if you do come around to wanting to be in a relationship again, maybe you'd be able to feel it out a little bit differently. You'd be able to possibly have a different experience. Um, I think loneliness is very sad, but it's also not something to be avoided at all costs. Um, Patrick Carnes talks about transforming loneliness into solitude. And I think there can be some value in that. I'm really sorry that you're hurting, and I'm sorry that the history has been that people leave you. My hope for you is that doesn't have to be your future going forward. And I would say maybe see if you could reframe that a little bit and see if there's some value in living a solitary life, something that's exciting to you about that, something that you look forward to, things that you get to do because you're solitary that you don't always get to do in relationships.
Yeah, it's there's a ton of research on that humans do better physically and emotionally when we feel a part of rather than apart from. We are a pack animal,
Mm-hmm.
but our ability to tolerate a tight pack versus a loose pack versus a really loose pack varies by person. We are not all the same. I'm single. I choose to be single, but I have a pack. I have some very close friends. They know all my crap. When something's going on, I pick up the phone and I call them. But I cannot tolerate one of them in my house for very long. I'm having people over for New Year's Day, and it's scheduled from 11 to 2. And at 2 o'clock, I will have to throw some people out. I will have to say the party is
Yeah.
over. We need to go home now.
Yeah.
Because I am exhausted. I lose energy to other people. That's the mark of an introvert. And I don't trust other people. It comes from, not trusting other people. And I've had to work very, very hard to feel a part of. But it looks very different for me than it does for a lot of other people. A lot of other people, they don't feel a part of unless they're in a romantic relationship and they're tight with their kids and this, that just makes my skin crawl. So I get it. And I love what Jon said about there's a difference between loneliness and isolation and solitude. For me, solitude is a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Loneliness and isolation are not. Thanksgiving this year, I made a conscious decision to stay home alone and have some solitude. I did a gratitude list. I talked to family on the phone and things like that. We did a Zoom call like this. So it wasn't entirely alone, but I had a day where I was able to reflect and actually, for me, give thanks for the life that I have. If that had just happened rather than being a conscious choice, I would have felt very lonely.
Yeah.
So I really feel for what you're going through right now. A tough situation, but you're here, you're finding support, you are trying to connect and find healthy people. It is possible. I have found people that I can trust and that I really love and care about, but they do not live in my house.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's, just to reiterate your point, Scott, the way we connect, there's not a one way that connection works. I think it's really about navigating your particulars around what kind of herd you need and how tight versus how loose. And that all comes from this inner knowing, that comes from knowing your own voice, not from reading a book or looking at other people and saying, well, this is how it must be. And if I can't do that or can't sustain that, then something must be wrong with me. It really is very, very individualized. And I believe that now we live in a time in this world where diversity in relationships is far more possible than what we had before. Like there's a million and one ways to connect with another person now. And it doesn't always have to be, romantic hand in hand, face to face. living together every moment. You can really configure that in so many different ways, which is, I think, a wonderful opportunity.
Yeah. I also wanted to point out that healthy, normal people, that's a very relative term. Again,
That's,
it's what can I talk, what is healthy, normal for, in my world, it probably looks very different than healthy and normal in John's world.
yeah.
It's, Dr. Rob Weiss, in his book Prodependence, he added a chapter at the end kind of talking about this particular topic, and I think he titled it "Twos Don't Marry Eights" or something, or "Emotional Twos Don't Marry Emotional Eights." And his point was, he wasn't trying to judge and rate, how psychologically well or unwell we are. He was saying, if we're used to a certain amount of chaos in our life and dysfunction, and we we grew up on that, it's what we're used to, we thrive on it, we're going to find a partner who gives us that. Because if we get somebody who's, the textbook definition of healthy and normal, they're going to be really boring.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to drive us nuts. We're not going to be able to put up with them. And then one of the issues is, one person, I'm used to chaos, so I marry an alcoholic. And then my alcoholic husband or wife gets sober and starts changing who he or she is and how he or she behaves. And that affects me. And either I get into a process of healing as well and we heal together, or we're going to have a bit of a divide that wasn't there before. I'm way off topic. But
No, I think it's that normal and healthy is always evolving and changing, for what we need. I look at the close relationships I had even 10 years ago, and I would die in those relationships now. Like the friendships, I've changed, I've grown, my needs are different than they were. And I think it's more about finding folks who are either their brand of dysfunction matches our brand of dysfunction, so we don't hurt each other with it too much. Or there's a mutual degree of flexibility. There's some give and take. I've heard it said before that one of the prime markers of mental health is flexibility. And that's really what I see in relationships that work long term is, there's a large degree of flexibility, between the parties involved, and that's what really contributes to things working.
Yeah. I mean, personally, I've had to surrender to the reality of who I am, which is, being a part of just looks very different for me than society tells me it should look. And the comment here right after this says, "Thank you. I feel like an outcast because I don't fit the standard of what society wants." Exactly. I get it. But I learned that connection to self is the most important, and I'm trying to bond with self first, for the first time in my life.
Yeah, I love that as a North Star. I'm trying to bond with self first. I think there's, for most people, there's one time in life where they actually graduate high school physically, and then we're emotionally graduating all the time. And by that, I mean, in high school, it was of the utmost importance where I went to school to fit in and to be normal enough. And I love the experience of going to college where my differences were celebrated and appreciated. And there wasn't this like, it needs to be the same. It was really easy to find. It was relatively much more easy to find folks who were part of my tribe once I got out of that like small, here's how it's got to be. And so, I think we deal with that like, am I acceptable to a large degree to enough people enough of the time? I think we deal with that constantly, and it's been very helpful for me to recognize that I don't need an entire group of people. I really just need like one or two to fill that with, and that's not just good enough. Like that's really, really good to have a couple of people that I know that I fit with, and I know that there's a place for me. And then whether or not I fit with the larger group, it doesn't matter as much as long as there's one or 2 points of clear understanding.
Yeah, I agree. If you have questions, we have time for maybe one or two more, so drop it into the Q&A feature. John, I wanted to take you back to something you said earlier, talking about extended family, particularly, your significant other's extended family. You have to learn about their family culture, and they have to
Mhm.
learn about your family culture. Can you describe that a little bit, and also give some tips on exactly how to go about that? Like, how do you start that conversation?
Yeah, yeah. So, learning about another culture, we first have to start with the understanding that what we perceive as normal is what we've been taught as normal, what we've been accustomed to. And so, when we run into something that we're not used to, we tend to put a good, bad label on it. And I think good and bad are irrelevant when it comes to culture and when it comes to relationships, because what works for one person may not work for another person. What doesn't work for one person could work beautifully for another person. And so, learning about your significant others, the culture that they came from, it really when I first started learning how to do this, it almost felt like I was playing dumb. When in reality, I was just asking good questions. I felt like I was playing dumb because I thought that I knew what I was observing and what it meant. But when I learned how to slow down and ask questions like, why do you guys do this? Or why is this so important to you? Or what is this about? Where did this tradition start? I actually found myself learning for the first time what it was actually about. I was leaving my assumptions and trying to find like hard information from people who experienced it. And I think a lot of times, especially when we're in a foreign situation or a culture that's not familiar to us, we rely on our own perceptions to orient us, and that's an important part of the picture. How does this make me feel? But how I feel about something is not the truth about that thing. And so we really have to reach out and we have to engage. And so learning about your significant other's culture, there are some ways you can do that formally if there's a religious or a cultural background that they come from, like reading about it, learning about it, watching it in 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 the movies, things like that. There's talking to the people who are part of it, because even within a culture for every individual in that culture is different. So asking, I have a sister-in-law who their family fled from Iran in the 80s when that government was overthrown, and like they had to flee in the middle of the night. And I've been able to talk with her. I've been able to talk with her brothers, with her parents, and just learn like what it was that they referred to themselves as Persians, and they lived in Persia. So what living in Persia was like for them, and why they miss it, and what's important, and what they made sure they kept intact with the family. Because my exposure to that culture was largely through the news and geopolitical problems that the United States has with Iran. I really don't have an understanding of the culture, even though I thought I did, because I knew a few things. So it's really that, like, there really are no dumb questions when you're learning about your partner's cultural background. And starting with that beginner's mindset, the very most basic things that you may not think to ask because they seem so apparent, ask them anyway. You might be surprised what you learn.
Yeah, and don't get annoyed when your partner asks you similarly basic.
Right.
Well, how could you not understand our tradition?
Right. Right.
We
And
don't.
that's some privilege of being on the inside, right? This makes total sense to me and it's in my DNA. Why wouldn't it be in yours? Well, of course it's not in yours. You didn't grow up with this. It's not like this is the right way to do things. There's not a right or a wrong or a good or bad in this situation. It's just the way that we do it. So yeah, it does need some explanation. It does need some thought. And I've noticed too, when my spouse and I have those conversations, it actually deepens my own understanding, my own appreciation for my family. Even if when she asks those questions, my response starts with an eye roll and is like, I can't believe I have to think about this. And I really don't want to talk about them. But it's actually, I think it's been quite healing for a lot of aspects of my relationship with my extended family to have someone, an outsider, take such an interest and really help me to walk through like why the traditions formed the way that they did, what it was like for me when I was younger, what I still value about it. Those kind of conversations have left me often feeling more rooted and more settled.
Yeah, and I think there's also something to be said for being open-minded enough to experience it. I had a sponsee, and this is not a family thing, but he was searching for a spiritual connection that worked for him, and he was visiting various religions, and he found one that he was starting to identify with, and part of the ceremony was candle lighting, part of what they do there, and he had to ask the priest about it, and the priest said, well, in a general way it signifies this, but why don't you try doing it every day for a week and then come back to me and we can discuss your experience of it. And I mean, my sponsor didn't stay with that particular religion, but I thought that was such a wonderful answer.
Yeah.
Here's the general answer. Why don't you try it and decide what it means to you, and let's have a conversation about it.
Yeah.
I thought that was fabulous, and I'm sure you've tried a lot of your wife's things, and she's tried a lot of yours, and learning more probably that way, or at least incorporating it into your understanding of what the holidays mean. Maybe.
Those are some of the most meaningful gifts I think we give each other in relationships, is when somebody says, like, I will come into your world, and I will give this a shot. Not like it will become me, but like, you mean enough to me, and these people mean enough to me that I'll let myself really experience this.
Yeah. So we've got about 5 minutes left. We've answered all our questions today, but it's kind of quiet. You want to wrap us up with anything, Jon, or have any final holiday thoughts?
Just going back to that thought, like, in my opinion, especially the holidays are wide open for you to make what you need to make out of them. And I would encourage everybody watching this to think about what they need to get out of the experience coming up, and to make sure that you allot for that first. Like, for example, for me, Thanksgiving, I don't know how I feel about this, but it's become less and less about the food for me and more about the day off and being grateful. And the experience I wanted to have before anything else is I wanted to go on a long hike with my dog. That's like, you could pull me on just about any day, and there's like a 90% chance that that's at the top of my list of what I want most. And so I did that. And like you, Scott, I took pen and paper and I wrote out some gratitude and really connected with that. And the rest of the day was gravy. The rest of the day was icing on the cake, because I made sure I had the experience that I needed to have first. And so I'd encourage everybody to look at whatever they need out of the upcoming holiday or the upcoming holiday season. Give yourself the gift of that, and see how that feels. See how that feels to not go, but to really intentionally give yourself the gift of time or intention, or whatever that is.
All right, thank you. What is your schedule going to be with the webinars moving forward now?
So we're going to do second and fourth Tuesday at 11 a.m. So the next one falls on Christmas Eve. And I won't be on for that. So the next one after that, I believe it's January 14th.
The second Tuesday in January.
Yep.
Okay. He says 11. That's Mountain Time, 10 o'clock Pacific.
Yep.
You can translate to where you are. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Jon, for a great session. And we'll see you second week of January.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.